I'm assuming, in fact, that we're going. Okay, so what today's video is, or what this video is about, is kind of a description of SteveMcRae and his cadre to some extent, and his particular grounding, right? His philosophical grounding. Now, and that's based on this particular video. I haven't seen this video yet, but I did watch a previous video where he's trying to discuss kind of a newer interpretation of the more, what he thinks is the more appropriate way to describe agnosticism, that is different than the traditional, or the more modern orthodox approach to what agnosticism is. So he's going to go ahead and speak on that. I'm just going to make my commentary and make my comments on the side of everything that, well, not everything that he's putting forward, but a great deal of what he's putting forward. And right out of the gate, like what he's contending seems to make sense. There's something called weak atheism and strong atheism, which he was using in a previous video that I don't know if he's going to be bringing up in this video, that he is attempting to logically parallel with this new notion of what it means to be agnostic. Now, I believe I've stated what I think he's attempting to do. Let's see what comes out of this video, right?
Screen share. Hey, look, it's my screen. So, where's my multi-axle?
So here he is, by the way, February 18th, 2019.
No, it's the document. Can you guys see that?
Let's at least bring this up.
Okay, so
Okay.
I like the whole lines there. So this is the multi-axle approach. This is what people seem to show a lot of times. Oh, look, agnostic and atheists are down in this direction, and atheists and theists are on this, right? There's a lot of problems with this, a huge amount of epistemic problems, and I'm going to be arguing and see if they kind of agree that the way it should be is more of a landscape approach, which is either similar to this, which is Dr. Malpass's version, view 2 on his use of reason, or I found this one that's pretty good too, which is very simplistic, but it's actually very similar. If you look at this one and this one, yeah, I mean, basically it's saying the same thing, right? That's like the dog.
Okay, so we're going to back up just a little bit again.
And we're going to start.
And we're going to stop here, right? Now, this is what he's calling the multi-axle, right, as opposed to the uniaxle, right? And here, this is what we say is the orthodoxy, right? Up here you have agnostic atheist and a Gnostic atheist on this axis between agnostic and Gnostic, right? A being the opposite. Gnostic atheist, not Gnostic. Like, I don't know, or I don't know about my atheism, or I know about my atheism. I don't know about my theism, or I'm like fence sitting, right? And then over here, I know or have no knowledge of. So he does theism, atheism, and that's that axis, right? And then he skips forward to this particular axis, or this particular unilateral axis, right, where he's basically saying, okay, here's atheist, here's agnostic, somewhere in between in terms of probabilistic outcomes of what one's relationship to B is, B being belief, right? Belief being what he's saying here. Oh, here's somebody claims that they know, right? So they know their atheism. P being the proposition, right? Belief. And then over here we have P, belief, and believes in their theism. And then here that they know, right? Anyway, so we'll continue with that. Let me just jump up right here. Uh-oh. Don't wanna lose them. Did I lose it? I might have lost it. Okay, where'd you go, buddy? Can't have the whole video going nowhere. Right? Okay. So anyway, we're gonna go ahead and continue to play.
Case would be somebody who believes it is true, and a Gnostic theist would be somebody who knows it's true, or believes that they know it's true. I think that's a very hard position to actually.
But can
you believe something without having knowledge of it? You can believe something without having knowledge, but you can't know something without having belief.
Okay, can you believe something without having knowledge? That guy asks, right? And he says you can believe something without having knowledge, but you can't knowledge something without having belief, right? So essentially, that's under contention, right? And that out of the gate is the first response and one of the first paradigms that SteveMcRae holds on to, right? Now, why does somebody hold on to the idea that you can have belief? Once again, let's see if I can scale this up a little bit, right? That you can have belief right here that covers this domain, but knowledge is somehow a subset, right? Now that's based on a philosophic notion. One notion is all in philosophy of what justified true belief is, like that knowledge is defined as a justification of one's belief that is verified as true, right? But there's undergirdings to that, right? So I'm going to probably backstep to that, but basically what that suggests, right, is that there's something that the justified true belief comes from propositional analysis, right? What it means to know means your relationship to a proposition. That's why when they speak about this in terms of logic, right, the way in which it's phrased is the belief relative to a proposition, BP, right? And so that's where this unilateral distinction came from. It's based on that. So let's just back that up one more segment so you can see how Steve holds that position relative to the
No,
question.
Dawkins scale is a little bit different because Dawkins has a surety. He'll say like a 7 is sure. Gnostic doesn't necessarily mean surety, right? If you look at Malpass's diagram, if you start off in the center, as you approach surety, right, you don't have to actually be at surety to have knowledge. And so the agnostic theist in this case would be somebody who believes that it's true, and an agnostic theist would be somebody who knows it's true, or believes that they know it's true. I think that's a very hard position to actually. But can you believe something without having knowledge of it?
Can you believe something without having knowledge in it?
You can believe something without having knowledge, but you can't know something without having belief.
Okay, so once again, you can't knowledge something without having belief, right? That's the contention here. But this is problematic because it's basically saying you have to believe something before you have knowledge about it, right? So you could say that you believe that I'm wearing a red hat. You trust your senses as a justification for that belief, and then you also trust that the camera and everything else, that there's no particular artifice going on, right? So I could say, oh, I've green screened this hat on, and that there's really no color to the hat, but you could accrue agreement, right? Something to that effect, right? And so there's this notion that, let's say you believe in okay, let's say you believe your grandma lives in a particular town, right? Something to that effect, right? Or a relative lives in a particular town. And you believe that because you have no evidence otherwise, right? You have no reason to doubt that somebody could be over there, right? So let me see how to articulate this best, right? Because as I'm going at this, I become a little bit like less direct, and my meaning the way in which I'm approaching the problem is kind of fettered out in and of itself, right? So you believe you know where somebody's house is, but you don't know where their house is, right? They could have moved, right? They could have moved between this domain of your believing and this knowledge, and that you don't know. But he said, Steve says, is there there's not knowledge without belief, right? But what does it mean? What does it mean to have the word relative or have the word grandma, right? Like, okay, so I have I have grandma, right? Grandma lives lives, right? Grandma lives in X town, right? Grandma lives in this town, right? Now, okay, so the question is, do you know that proposition, right? So first and foremost, the idea is your belief relative to a proposition, right? But now Steve says that you have, in order to know this, you have to believe something, right? And so, and then the question is, can you have? The other guy responded, can you have belief, or can you have knowledge without belief, right? Now that idea, right, the idea that you can have knowledge without belief, let's just say that you have first and foremost. Once one accrues has what is called a posteriori knowledge, right? When one has a posteriori knowledge, that's different than a priori knowledge, right? A priori knowledge is the difference between the synthetic and the analytic distinction, right? Where one is appropriated based on definitions of a case, like to say a bachelor is an unmarried man, right? That's definitional, and so that falls under, I believe, the synthetic. The analytic is relative to what one is experiencing generally, right? So in other words, the word grandma, does one question what the word grandma is? Do you know what grandma is, and are you able to say, or you just believe that you know what grandma is? So the guy's question is relevant. Can you just have knowledge without belief? And I say, once it's substantiated, in your psyche, right, that that grandma, the meaning, is something, then the extended proposition, grandma lives, right? Grandma lives, that becomes something else, right? Grandma lives is a different proposition than grandma lives in X town, right? Some particular town, right? And so the argument that stems out of this is the notion that knowledge, right, is justified true belief, right? And this belief, right? That's what knowledge is justified true belief, right? Which necessarily makes knowledge a type of belief or a subset of belief. Now that guy's arguing, is there ever knowledge that isn't a subset of belief? Right. Okay. So now where does this notion come from, right, in propositional logic? It comes from one's epistemology, right? So first and foremost, let's go here. You just Google knowledge, right? You're going to get a cursory definition, not a philosophic definition, right? Facts, information, skills acquired by a person through experience or education, theoretical or practical understanding of a subject, one's thirst for knowledge, their awareness or familiarity gained by experience or a situation, right? You go to the wiki, let's just pull up the wiki real quick, right, to get an idea, because my contention is that there's an undergirding to everybody's position, right, and that undergirding is held as kind of a foundationalism, right? Now I run through defoundational approaches to philosophy, and so that includes defoundational logics, which is like a paraconsistent logic, and paraconsistent logic has within it a type of what's called dileotheism, right? And even Steve will argue a very basic, kind of like the previous definition of knowledge. Steve has a very cursory definition of what dileotheism is, or what its implications are, right? And so here you'll get experience, education, perceiving under knowledge. You'll get epistemology, right? In philosophy, the study is called epistemology, right? And right here you can see justified true belief, right here, justified true belief, right? So here, epistemology means knowledge, right? And then logical discourse, a branch of philosophy concerning the theory of knowledge, right? Because you have what in philosophy you have what's called epistemology, epistemology, ontology, and phenomenology. You also have ethics, right? But epistemology is based on what one knows, ontology is on what is, and phenomenology is like the psychological intersection of these things, right? So a priori knowledge is, in the orthodox definition, right, as Steve goes on this preference for a unilateral distinction or preference for agnosticism relative to a multi-axle definition of agnosticism, I'm putting forth the proposition that the knowledge that undergirds his belief about knowledge being a subset of belief is dependent on a type of orthodoxy towards epistemology itself, right? That if one looks at the intersection between or among ontology, phenomenology, and epistemology, that we will find that the a priori knowledge set is where the orthodoxy comes in, right, to suggest that knowledge itself is a subset of belief. So if you want to believe that knowledge can exist to the same shoreline as belief, then you're going to run into some contention. But that is where this intersectional domain is amongst these three, right? So right here I put a posterior knowledge, or experiential knowledge, requires one's phenomenal self to be experiencing. They're utilizing the referential world of that which is ontic, that which could be pointed to, kind of the empiricism, and then one's claim to what knowledge is, right? And then that's somehow reduced back to to um, the notion of what, like, it's the required foundation in which Steve is creating his argumentation, right? So once again, knowledge here, we'll go over here, we have the Gidier problem. That's a type of approach towards something that's within doubt using a statistical basis, right? Which is the preference that he's using for this single axle definition, right? But if you go to belief, right here, you'll go, let's see what their Venn diagram suggests here, right? Okay, huge write-up on, you click on justified true belief, and it just goes to belief, right? And so right here we have knowledge as a subset of belief, and then here we have truths, right? And so right here is the justified true belief is the intersection. So that's their preferred diagram of where knowledge sits, right? So what would it mean to utilize something like the word grandma, right? Where it's never in doubt. If you have no doubt and you've already substantiated your relationship with a term, right? Like you don't question the word truth often, right? So do you question the word grandma often? Do you believe when you use the word grandma that it's referencing what you think it means? Well, you're within a group of common language speakers already, right? So to say that you know what you're saying already presumes a foundation of believing that you're speaking the same language as everybody else, right? And so that's where there's this distinctiveness that comes in, where one could suggest, right, that this itself is a type of embedded dogmatic orthodoxy of what knowledge is, right? Knowledge is often put on a scale, uh, a dichotomous scale relative to doubt, right? If you have no reason to doubt, and you seemingly are moving along well in the world, then one could by default say that they know, right? But you could also say knowledge is based on a type of relationship with confidence or certainty, right? That as one approximates a certainty, right? So we go back to something like Bayesian notions of knowledge, right? Or the Gettier problem. So we'll go to the Gettier problem here, right? And so there's all sorts of different branches of how one can speak about philosophical domains and what one means, right? And so there's a lot of people that attempt to bring people to kind of a common basis from which to accept this grounding. The problem I have with SteveMcRae is that he's insistent that he himself has a monopoly or the closer approximation to where philosophy most appropriately describes language. I mean, he's going to claim the rule system and then try to reduce everybody to it. Anyway, yeah, you guys can read this particular aspect. Let's continue on with the video.
Knowledge entails belief, but belief does not entail knowledge. So if you look at the diagram, as you approach certainty, right? As you go this way, you have to have belief first. I have to believe the proposition, and then I can know the proposition. So if we say I know me, that entails I also believe me.
But people believe on faith, and faith is just a type of knowledge. It's generally conceded that faith is knowledge.
No, I disagree. Belief has nothing to do with faith in this particular drawing.
Okay, belief has nothing to do with faith in this particular drawing. So already the guy's making a proposition about faith now and knowledge. People believe on faith, right? And then Steve says, no, not in this particular drawing, right? But Steve is also eschewed, meaning he denies that anyone can know about a God, right? Because he's caught in this particular domain, which is his favorite domain, and the domain amongst a lot of atheists is that, oh, well, there's surety, they can be sure about what they don't know over here, they can believe what they don't know over here, but that theists don't have any evidence of their theism. It's all some sort of rhetorical exegesis device or something like that. Like that's where Steve's relationship to one's theos is limited. So let's continue on. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Belief is what you think a proposition is true. That you're convinced a proposition is true.
Belief is that you're convinced that a proposition is true, right? So, but see that the idea of justified true belief, right, is that, and that's a definition of knowledge, right? The problem with justified true belief is that you're looking for some sort of like to justify means in a way to architect a relationship with something. So for example, let's bring up the red hat again. The red hat is a referential piece of data, right? So for you to argue that you know that I have this particular hat on that has the majority of it red, such that we could call it red, right? That you have a visual referent justification to the real world, right? So all of a sudden, the idea that there's a justification that's based on your sense data, your phenomenology, right? So you have your phenomenological domain, right, which is coming from the individual, right? It corresponds with a group of common language speakers up here, communal domain among common language speakers. If you guys want to know where I'm getting this particular text, it's under my embedded contradiction book at mikefale.com. Just going to pull this up here, right? Go to here, boom. That's my website. You can go there. You can scroll down. I'd pull it up and show you guys this. Embedded contradiction. You should see it right on the front page. It's it's like a PDF file you can just click on and download, and I'm updating a last edit for it, right? But anyway, so these are my this is my contention is where I'm basing this. Of course, now I slightly lost my train of thought. We're only 6 minutes in here.
And the thing is, this is what when you guys had Cy on last, like this is what was really getting to me because he kept saying that Christianity is not belief in God, it's a knowledge that He exists, and it's like, well, whether or not God exists, you also believe it.
Yeah.
Like that was
See, okay, so there's some contention here, kind of like, which is a shift between, let's say, the solipsistic world, where you're all alone in the world and I'm merely a figment. Maybe I'm an embodied figment, maybe I'm just like a non-playable character, right? Or maybe I am a symbol to you, right? Some people get into a psychological mindset where they say, oh, I'm the center of the universe. Even my body isn't necessarily real, right? It feels pain, but that's just information theory. That's just a data set reading of whatever the ghost is inside of my mind, right? And then you'll get people saying, well, your mind must correlate to a brain, which correlates to the material world. And if it correlates to the material world, then you accept that you're in a world. And if you accept that you're in the world, then you expect the other people in the world. And that you're slowly evidencing a justification away from the external world of other agents as not just being a product of your mind, like in the future or some other dimension coming back to haunt yourself, inform yourself of yourself through depictions of other people, right? So some people can get into a particular psychological mindset, especially when they're thinking about that which is supernatural or the domain of one's theology, right? So the distinction that they're making between the idea of one knows through theological revelation, right, that God exists, might be hand in hand with a type of extraction, right, that would allow one to start moving in closer to a what do you call it? A solipsistic belief or a faith in solipsism. A faith in solipsism would be kind of like turning also like just the orientation of oneself being primary to the universe, right? So that would stem from, I believe, the phenomenological domain. It would be a preference for the phenomenological domain to inflate, right? And right here, these three domains can inflate and deflate, eclipsing over the other two depending on one's preference. If one is a solipsist in their faith, that means that the phenomenological domain is preferenced and it overshadows the epistemological and the ontological domains. So that, once again, this is my undergirding what I think is the basic foundations from which these guys are coming together even in order to have this discussion on agnosticism's lingual relationship to atheism on a multi or unilateral axis.
The only problem here is that knowledge does not have any certain degree of certainty. Rather, it is just what is justifiable to you. What is a justifiable belief, or not justifiable belief, but a justifiable piece of evidence could be considered knowledge. It doesn't have to be true.
Well, yeah,
so I believe
no. Knowledge has to be true by definition. You cannot have false knowledge.
Sure.
Okay, once again, okay, knowledge has to be true by definition. So all that is doing is once again reifying my proposition that Steve is basing his philosophy of what knowledge is on the notion of justified true belief, meaning that's his preference for defining what knowledge is. Once again, a priori knowledge, right here, he's correct in having that domain. Where the other guy is coming from is from the a posteriori knowledge domain, suggesting that some sort of revelation or some sort of imprint or some sort of lack of being able to doubt a certain evidencing, right, then takes a primacy that one knows something, right, and then any notions of a workaround to be able to articulate it, right, even if the event is ineffable, that one cannot speak on it, they wouldn't know how to describe it, or that by describing it they're somehow not encapsulating the full phenomena in which they're claiming they were engaged, right? So it would be a preference between the ontology and the phenomenology relative to the epistemology. At this point, if I interact with Steve at all, he eschews me, kicks me away. He wants nothing to do with it because he, once again, his goal is to monopolize how one's preference towards epistemology should most be, right? And he'll argue this, but
True empirically?
Yes. Knowledge must be true. There was three.
Oh, well, no, hold on. It doesn't have to be true.
Knowledge must be true. Proposition has to be true. Proposition has to be true, and you have to weigh the proposition to have knowledge.
Yes, I agree.
Yes, but
it's propositional
Like,
knowledge.
it doesn't have to be proven.
No, it doesn't have to be proven. No, it just has to be true. You can't have false knowledge. You can't say, well, my knowledge was wrong. That makes no sense.
Yeah.
That's nonsense.
Well, certainly one could have a belief and have a knowledge of themselves being preferenced as the center of the world, know that they're the center of their own world as almost a solipsist, and that is considered, in lieu of understanding now that they're part of a community, right? That could be said to be false, right? So the idea, right, even if you expand this as a contradiction, right? Which, because Alex Malpass, who developed this particular thing, right? He's just this dude that studied logic, right? He's got his PhD in it, but he's not like an amazing philosophical thinker. He's a good logical propositional thinker, but over here knows not P, right? Is the atheist knows P. These are on a spectrum. Can these domains cross? Could he draw a line from here over here and here over here? I say yes, he can. The relegation of where the lines are keeps a certain limitation there. But now Alex Malpass, he's interviewed Graham Priest. Graham Priest is a diletheist. Anyway, I'm gonna pause right here and make certain that I'm actually recording everything appropriately, because I'm not certain whether or not what's happening here is actually being recorded. Okay. Let's see what this kicks up. Oh, yeah. Okay. It looks like it is. It looks like it is. Okay. So I'm just gonna cancel that. We're just gonna carry on. Okay. So, whoop. Oh, screen recording still going. It says increasing its megabytes. 33 minutes, and we were through 7 minutes. Sorry for the delay.
You can say I had a false belief. I wrote a blog on this called The Principle of Attribution and Retraction, if anyone wants to go read it on www.greatdebatecommunity.com. And the way it would work is very simple. If, let's say I say, hey, Jim, I believe it's going to rain tomorrow. And let's say it doesn't. Okay, well, I just had a false belief, right?
So see, in Steve's world, he's going to make a knowledge claim. Hey, it's going to rain tomorrow, right? He doesn't say I know it. He just makes a claim, right? Now, if the claim comes true, like it does rain, one could say that they knew it the whole time, but even that would be what he would say. Well, that was still just a belief. You don't know it until you have that empirical justification relative to the world, right? Like knowledge is somehow necessarily in all cases correspondence to truth. But part of my book here, if you get to the beginning, the whole thing is an issuance against a type of truth, right? The problem with people is that they believe what they think. Then we go into a whole dialogue about humans' relationship to truth and truth questing, right? Which I think is kind of an interesting thing, and hence I wrote on it. I'm just gonna look up justified true. Let's see. The exception as to why knowledge need be a subset of belief, right? And so I have this paragraph right here where I explain why this is, that the preface of the statement of justified true belief is most often the most cited basis or definition of what knowledge is. And irony of this is that the definition, let's see, sorry, put on my glasses, even though I could blow it up. Let's do it this way, right? The irony of this definition of knowledge often comes up when people disputing what is true. So something of begging the question comes to mind as a conclusion supporting truth. Via knowledge utilizes knowledge as a component of truth, right? So now knowledge is also a component of truth, yet truth is what one says one must have to state a knowledge, right? So that's an irony. A begging of the question is a circular aspect. We, those who engage in contemporary philosophical discourse, whom are more sophisticated, drop the word truth, right? Just say an aspect of belief, although there is reason to maintain the word, leave knowledge as justified belief. That if one has a justification, right, like, hey, the weatherman says it's going to rain tomorrow. I believe it's going to rain tomorrow. I'm sensing the air. There seems to be a lot of storms. There's a trend for it. I'm justifying my claim that I know it's going to rain tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow means midnight and that it's 11:55 and one is empirically watching the clouds. And then they say, I know it's going to rain tomorrow, right? So there's this slight variance that goes on right here. Okay, abutted against this particular definition of what belief per se is, right, is it is contended that belief necessarily remains as a subset of knowledge, right? It's contended that belief remains as a subset of knowledge, right? Meaning, I'm the one that's doing that reversal, right? That knowledge is the subset of this. Is contended that belief, that's my content, is necessarily a subset of knowledge. This is to stress that one must believe something X before one knows said thing, right? So I'm even contrasting wrongly and wrongheadedly, right, that belief necessarily remains as a subset of knowledge. Okay, it's abutted against the definition of belief per se is. It is contended, right? It is my contention. Here we go. Let me edit that. It is my contention. It is my contention that belief necessarily remain. Oh, no, I'm not going to do that. Okay, hang on. It is contended that, let's switch it around, that knowledge, because obviously I think I mistook it. Now I'm arguing, see, I'm arguing my relationship relative to my own antithesis, subset of belief. So to stress that one must believe something X before one knows said thing X, right? I think I got that reversed also. So wait, let me make certain, because it's been a while since I've read my own document. The presumption is based on a type of dichotomy of a priori and a posteriori knowledges, right? The preference historically has been towards the a priori, the epistemological domain, namely that one's epistemology has been referenced as resting upon one's recursive articulations. Once again, my a priori knowledge about the use of the word grandma, my knowledge that I know what grandma means is based on recursive articulations, not just recursive of the use of the word grandma as a referent, right? There's no doubt that I know what the composition of each of the elements of the language are as I re-articulate them. I could use the word truth. How do I know what truth is? I've been using it, right? So some are used through experience. That's where arguments come into play. That's why these guys are having these discussions, right? But once again, Steve's tactic is to try in an attempt to strong arm this, right? So let me back this up, right? And let me do this. It is my contention. It's my contention to flip this. Touch that. Belief. Right? Like how to falsify it. Flip it. My contention. Falsify it. Flip or falsify. Why don't I add that? Let's see. All right, let's see. Of course, I'll have to go over this later again. Falsify this idea that belief, knowledge is such that is a subset of belief, right? Okay. Okay. Then let's pull that out. Go. Okay. Anyway, so let me just continue on through this, right? Okay, so you have a priori knowledges and a posteriori knowledges, right? And it's more sophisticated to drop the word truth and just say we're justified in having a belief, and that's how we know things, because truth has been a component. It's part of the recursive articulation that one embeds themselves in this, right? And this is all part of the Western analytic tradition to support, you know, basically a Cartesian foundation of knowledge, right? And so then it's propagated forward and accepted as such. But the reapproach of dialetheism and defoundational logics question the undergirding that's being supported. Okay, so namely that knowledge of an X or item X requires a subjective register that one knows that a thing, item X, right? In this case, grandma, let's say. So this occurs when there is a claim made by someone like the band over the hill played Led Zeppelin covers. Right? There's a proposition. There's a band over the hill that played Led Zeppelin covers. And another person says, how do you know? The first person is then challenged at least two levels. One, they are challenged to question their knowledge of Led Zeppelin, their lyrics, what a hill is, and what a band is, etc. Meaning you could fall onto any one of these areas. The second is to shore up words confirming their already established knowledge as a knowledge, right? You have knowledge of what a band is. You have knowledge of what Led Zeppelin is. You have a knowledge of what lyrics are, and not a tentative belief, right? Already established a knowledge as a belief and not a tentative belief. And it is here that, depending on a type of question being colloquial, right, day-to-day usage, right, in one case, indexing or philosophically interrogating on another, right? So once again, Steve's approach in here is to find what he believes is the most modern, philosophically grounded opinions and then argue those, right? So I'm not trying to fault him in his endeavor. I'm trying to clarify that he himself is not approximating truth overall. It's a very specific category in which he wants to impress this particular notion of what the case is. And anyone that comes in sideways from a different axis, he issues him away as being nonsense, right? I'm always in battle with this guy on his own Facebook post. He's like, oh, you're just being rhetorical and long-winded. And anyway, so here we go. Knowledge is a set and established that questioning what is known is only found within the face of doubt, right? And where doubt is absent, knowledge persists. So if I say grandma lives in X town, and there's nothing to assume that she moved, then that remains a tentative belief, and that is equivalent. It shares the same domain colloquially as knowledge. There's no room to believe that you doubt. There's no room to believe that that knowledge is somehow upset. Who you think? Maybe you confuse the Doors for Led Zeppelin? You don't know the difference? right? That would be a problem. But as soon as you know Led Zeppelin and you trust it, right, then you say, oh, well, the knowledge is there. So in a way, there's an irony. I'm both accepting the notion of justified true belief, and I'm obscuring, I'm finding the exception or the caveat to that held foundation, right? So it's holding these in two hands, right? I know everything Steve's going to argue about, and yet here's a caveat, right? Okay, and then I'll get back to this. Only in the class of cases where philosophical interrogation takes place would a testimony of one's history about all elements and the preambles of belief need to be shored up, or a demonstration of one's knowledge may be required. See Philosophy of Human Lingual Development above. To obtain some knowledge based on some history that one witnessed and had gone through, experienced, can sprout up within a hard ground of the present, and to be stated with full confidence that what that knowledge experienced is as true and applicable in the moment in some facet or utility as it was when the obtainer of such knowledge obtained the knowledge. Such that if a baby reaches for something, right, you could ascribe that the baby knows, even without being able to articulate it, that it knows a mobile is above it, right? You could, as a third party, do a legal stand-in and say, oh yeah, but look, the baby knows which one's red, and which one's blue, and which one's soft, and it has a preference for the soft blue objects, right? And you have an instance that makes that so prior to having an articulation about one's relationship of belief and knowledge, defending one's own testimony and their memory about an occurrence. For example, the woman whom I just encountered had a tattoo on her arm is a knowledge claim. Cases where and when knowledge is not a subset of belief, right? And so I go here and I said, in the case referenced above, an acquisition of knowledge has been included within the person claiming it. It is stored within the mindscape or of memory emerging when it does, and so the reapproach of one's mind back to the domain of a specific knowledge as it comes to mind as a memory said to be known with complete confidence, with no doubt. A reiteration of the process of acquisition of the knowledge primarily is no longer present, needed, nor in consideration. Meaning, I'm going to use these words, like words or grandma or whatnot. I don't need to reconsider whether or not I know the word grandma. It's already there through my experience of using it. So once again, the domain moves back to the a posteriori experiential domain for knowledge, right? Anyway, so I go on and I carry on. I have multiple examples about how it is we approach and know certain things, right? And so that's just the simple one. I'm just going to quickly read that, and then we're going to go back to that. When I know the lyrics of a song, I listen publicly to a song being played. My knowing the lyrics is demonstrated communally. My knowledge is also defined communally. Even if I stumble and doubt and have the notion that I merely believe that I know the lyrics, the community defines the nascent word know. So this is a post-factual knowledge claim, which parses away belief in lieu of a reference of a community of common language speakers and music listeners who see and would testify he knows the lyrics, right? Meaning if I sang a Led Zeppelin cover, or if I was referencing a band that did Led Zeppelin covers, I could say he knows the lyrics. The community would not say that they believe that I know the lyrics. If their essential notion of my singing matched the lyrics order exactly, my personal doubt about the matter is a type of doubt injection. Meaning if I believed I knew the lyrics, but I also believed I didn't know them all, but the community said that I did know them, then all I did was inject doubt into that situation about my knowing the lyrics, right? Which this is the whole idea of trying to segment off oh, well, then you're back into a belief mode, right? This is the distinction, folks, between what's called the discrete and the diffuse. The discrete is a hard parenthetical outline. The diffuse is respiratory, it's atmospheric, right? And this comes more than just under conjecture. Anyway, so let me continue this. If a debate arose about an error-free ordering of words, this would perhaps be argued with someone who claimed they were guessing on a multiple choice exam, where they claimed that they didn't know but only guessed the answer correctly, and that they don't want to be confused for someone who actually had the knowledge of what was being examined. Since the lexical field is far, far greater and more expansive than a 5 or 6 answer options, the karaoke singer would have a much harder time making this claim that they didn't know. Meaning, if you were successful at singing it and the community agreed that you sang it correctly, you don't have a lot of options. Meaning, there's more elements in that moment than there would possibly be in on a multiple choice test, right? And so anyway, this continues on, and I carry forward throughout this text. Let's get back here.
What's wrong? No big deal. No harm, no foul. Crap happens.
Right.
Now,
Unless you were justified in believing that.
Well, hang on. I was still wrong. Regardless of if I was justified or not, you can have a justified false belief or an unjustified false belief. So a justified false belief would be, okay, well, I looked at the Doppler radar, I know a little about meteorology, I made a prediction. Yeah, it didn't happen, right? Predictions, when it comes to predicting the weather, don't always come true. But I would be justified to have that false belief. I was like, okay, I was justified to have it, but I was wrong.
No. That is a justified true belief.
No, it wasn't true. It has to be true to have a justified true.
No, but the belief is true. It is a true belief.
No. You're confused. The beliefs are always...
Okay, so...
belief that is true means that the propositional state is true.
Okay, so right here, right now, the guy Steve's arguing with, Steve is the voice that, is this icon. The other guy that he's arguing with, they're both, in my view, okay having the dialogue, right? But notice how Steve's preference is to say, no, that's not correct. Let me tell you what is correct. Right? Once again, attempting to monopolize or garner agreement. One of the other foundations of truth is truth upon agreement.
So if I believe it's raining, it's raining has to be true for me to have that belief, to be a justified true belief. It's not that it's true that I believe it.
Okay.
That doesn't matter. That's because it's a core.
But it is they are justified in believing that the proposition is true, yes?
This is the other orientation, right? Is that knowledge is somehow necessarily based on a discrete definition of what a proposition is, right? Such that if I say it's raining outside, somewhere on the globe it's raining outside. The domain of what is considered the region in which the proposition has appropriate articulation would be on, is it raining outside such that if I walk out I would need an umbrella, that I'm going to get hit with rain, that it's raining outside in your field of sight but over there, or is it a generalized description of what's going on globally, somewhere globally, right? And so you would have that problem, right? So one could go and say, if I say, oh, it's raining outside, and I mean it as a global proposition, and someone goes, wait, you're false, you were wrong in believing that, then they've reduced the optic down, right? And that's exactly what this contention is here, that is a problem. There's also a problem with the idea that to say it's raining outside doesn't have a meta meaning to it, right? Logicists will often demand that it doesn't. They'll kick out an idea that there is no way that the content of the term it's raining outside could possibly mean that one must be referring to right outside, the idea of raining, and not, let's say, if one had a lover in the house and that they had utilized this phrase as a means to maintain the lover, right? Meaning the lover says, oh, I want to go. And whether it's raining outside or not raining outside, the other lover says, it's raining outside. And that's a substitute for saying, I don't want you to go, right? Like it would be an inconvenience, right? So the content of the phrase is not actually pointing to anything. So the meaning it would be, in their eyes, a false proposition. That would be a false proposition, right? To say it's raining outside and have no disclosure one way or the other. No need for disclosure one way or the other. Not remaining agnostic, not even positioning oneself to the proposition in a not knowing, maybe knowing, should perhaps reflect on it notion. The phrase, it's raining outside, is merely a stand-in, like a metamine, right, for saying, I wish you would not leave. Anyway, these are the nuances
If they have
that they
reasons
never
to,
cover.
like the Doppler radar, meteorology.
Okay,
If I
so
said, hey Jim, I have a magic 8 ball, and the magic 8 ball told me it's going to rain tomorrow. Am I justified to believe that?
no.
Clearly not.
I mean, well, it all depends. I don't know what your level of standards of acceptance for justification are.
There's no way in the world you can convince epistemologists that the magic 8 ball is a standard for justification. Not going to ever happen.
Okay, so right there, Steve admits he's an epistemologist, right? So his domain of consideration stems from what I was pointing to on that previous graphic over here about his preference is for this a priori Cartesian approach towards knowledge as justified true belief within a propositional state. He has no variant leeway for introducing a philosopher such as this guy who might be coming from a more colloquial ground or an experiential ground, kind of redicing and splicing the approach to what belief and knowledge could be. Steve isn't very open to this. So that's kind of
Not an epistemologist, but
I guess.
But I mean,
that's irrational. Even for anybody, you cannot have.
Of course, it's irrational.
That's not justified by definition.
Yeah.
It's irrational. To be justified, it has to be rational. That's the whole point.
So to justify means rational, and rational means measured relative to something else. Like you're triangulating an idea. Like, oh, I have a belief that I'm wearing a red hat. What are my justifications? Well, I can see it. You can see it. Well, if this is just a verbal podcast, you can't see it. You can't verify it. In that case, you're just hearing the word. And the word becomes the reference, and then you trust whether I do or I don't based on you, right? So your positioning relative to a non-referential claim that you're only hearing auditorily, right? Like if I dart behind here and I go, whoosh, right? Do you know right now that I have the hat on? Do you have any reason to doubt? Are you only listening to this whole audio verbally, or were you witnessing it visually? And if you were witnessing it visually, then do you have a reason, meaning do you have something in the empirical world, meaning the computer, to point to trust, and the belief in what you believe in artifice or a simulation or a green screen or whatever else is that would say, yeah, Mike Fail, dospook, it has a red hat, right? You have a rationale to base that. The problem is that Steve doesn't want to dice and splice it this way. It wants to be very straightforward, very cut and dry. That's the problem with SteveMcRae.
Rational or logical?
Rational. If I guess by guessing inherently is unjustified. If I say, hey, are you guessing that it's going to rain tomorrow? Then that's an unjustified belief one way or another. You can't guess and have a justified belief.
So is a God belief a justified belief?
You can't guess and have a justified belief, but your only reason to guess, right? Like if you've been watching this video, then you're guessing whether or not I still have the hat on or not. If you're only listening to this video, then whether I have a hat on or not was never essentially justified by you, right? It just wasn't, right? And so there's already two domains in which to approach what Steve is arguing and how these guys, their dialectic, their discourse is coming about.
An individual can think so. Yeah, I think you can justify a belief in God, sure.
But But is it a justified true belief?
Well, it's hard to say if it's
That's
true
a different thing. But I mean, like,
point.
yeah, that's why we're doing all this.
That's the argument. Does God exist?
Yeah.
Is it true?
Yeah, sure.
The thing is, with being justified, like a person that had some sort of personal experience, that you could say that they're justified in their God belief. That doesn't mean that you're justified to, believe them. But
Right.
you could say that.
Well, I mean, to me, I kind of, hold to Nozick, as far as this goes, if it,
Are you quoting Nozick? You're gonna really quote Nozick, really?
yeah, hell yeah.
Well,
Nice.
okay.
I just talked about Nozick last night, actually, to Ozzy.
I think Ruben.
According to Nozick, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but if the justification is false, then that automatically means knowledge being false.
Yes. Under justified true belief. Wait. Under JTB, there's many different theories of knowledge.
Okay.
There's reliabilism.
I would say
Pragmatic theory of knowledge.
I would say that's under. I would say that's a reworking.
Right. Okay. Now. Okay. So after Steve spends all this time knuckling down this point, see, Steve's aware. Steve's not a dumb guy, right? And we had this joke going back and forth, like I'm the smartest dumb guy, and he's the dumbest smart guy, right? Because he's not aware that this whole time, 11 minutes in, granted for you guys it's like an hour, that he's finally. Right, he's finally willing to shore up, like under justified true belief, this and this is the case.
Because that original theory did not entail Nozick's.
Yeah, well, they revamped JTB to have JTB Plus. Have you heard of that? They added
Okay.
And
I don't know.
yeah, truth tracking
I thought
conditions.
it was wisdom.
No, a truth tracking condition is to say that it's called sensitivity, and what it is saying that if a subject believes P in the next possible world, it would be the case that they did in the next possible world over, then it would still count as knowledge, but that involves possible world semantics, and it's very confusing to say the least. But
Okay.
Linda, her last name is Zabieski, I think you pronounce her name. I can never pronounce her name right. Zabieski, but she wrote a really good paper, and I really liked it on belief first. Theories will always have get here issues, no matter if you
Right.
however you look at them, because they're all going to have luck involved. It's called epistemic luck, and so it doesn't matter whether you do truth tracking.
Now here the thing is, right now Steve loves anyone that's in academia, right? If you're not an accredited academician, he somehow he's less likely to want to get into your good graces, right? Because Steve really, like, Steve graduated with like a bachelor or something or a master's in nuclear science, right? And then he ends up having kind of a low level job. So he raised his daughter working at Lowe's as a manager generally. So he's got this notion like he really wants. Plus, he's got the great debate community that he kind of took a bunch of argumentation and he's like, hey, I'm just going to start the Google Plus Great Debate Community. So he did that, and that garnered a lot of attention, and he built that, and then he migrated over to the Non Sequitur show, and he used that as a reference to this. But the whole point is his cadre of people, he preferences academics, right? Well, I'm writing a paper. I've submitted it, not academically, formally, because I'm still doing the last edit on it. But I've sent it off to multiple philosophers to read, and I've gotten some okay feedback. And like I said, it's different ways to skin this. So as I critique Steve McRae is aware of his position relative to justified true belief and the knowledge set, right? So any arguments that I'm going to make, he's already explained his backdoor to it.
Or not, but yeah, JDP has some real issues to it, but it's pretty basic, and just for sake of
my point though was to say that he basically, as soon as it comes to semantics, then all of a sudden it's over his head. It's too confusing, right? So he likes to try to keep things in order and kind of simplistic. I can't fault him for that, but I fault him for not being open to more of a continental tradition of philosophy where semantics is where the focus is.
the argument, we can use JTB. I like reliabilism myself, but whatever. But for the sake of this particular discussion, justification is different than having the belief or not, right? So in that case where I believe there was raining, I could be wrong on that, and what I do is I say, hey, look, I had a false belief. Whether I was justified or not, I had a false belief. Now, let's say that I said today, hey, Jim, I know it's going to rain tomorrow. If it comes out tomorrow, it didn't rain. I didn't say that my knowledge was wrong. I said I never had knowledge to begin with.
But
Right?
that's the truth aspect of the JTB though that so it's not considered knowledge.
It's not considered knowledge because knowledge by definition has to be true. The proposition has to be true.
Right, it has to be justified and it has to be true and it has to be a belief.
Right. Yeah, but I believed it, and I had Doppler radar, and I made a really intuitive guess based on induction, but it didn't come true. You didn't have knowledge.
But at the time that you made the prediction, you had knowledge.
So once again, here it's interesting, right? Because the notion that knowledge for Steve, right, under the JBD, which he's reapproaching to solidify justified true belief, JTB, right, is that one does not have knowledge until things. It's only after the fact that one can have knowledge, right? That one only knows when one is justified after what has been the case has been presented as the case. It's trusted. The giddier problem indefinitely remains a problem to the idea. Like if you see two sheep on a mountain and then you go closer and you realize one of them's a cardboard cutout, right? And then you leave saying, oh, there was one sheep on the mountain, right? Just to go down the field and let's say talk to a farmer that says, oh yeah, that's not a sheep. That was a hybrid goat that just a lot of people think is a sheep, right? Then you never go back to that field. You just continue driving on. You're left ultimately now not knowing whether or not the farmer is lying, whether or not you were incorrect, whether or not what you called a sheep was a sheep, and you don't have any necessarily definitive proof about what in fact the case is, right? So once again, it's this drive, this desire, this human desire to get to truth. That's what Steve is addicted to, right? That's what the great debate community is addicted to. Truth questing, right? With a belief that there's not always the possibility of re-injecting doubt somewhere.
Knowledge, yes.
No, I disagree. In order for them to have knowledge, the problem.
No, come on.
Wait. Yeah, Jim, how do you have? Listen to me carefully.
You can't have knowledge if the thing turns out to be wrong.
Yeah, how do you have?
I have no problem saying that you can have knowledge of false propositions. This idea that God only knows true propositions. I say no. God knows all false propositions as well, right? Like just the idea that rationality. Here we go. Rationality is a subset of irrationality. There's more irrational ways to think about the world than there are rational ways to think about the world. That's why we have a preference to approximate truth.
Hasn't turned out to
Jim, think about this. The proposition is it's going to rain tomorrow. That is not a true or false statement because it hasn't happened yet. So you can't say it's true because it's in the future. This is one of the problems with truth makers for future propositions.
But can you say that it's false?
I would say I wouldn't even have it evaluated.
Okay, so once again, it's that idea. Like you could say, no, it's going to rain tomorrow, and that might be the meta-mean, right? Meta-mean being like, hey, a meta-mean is like a phrase like, hey, the skirts in the office are like this, but maybe there's no office, right? Maybe the guy's referencing a warehouse, and he calls it the office. That's a meta-mean. The skirts, that means the women. But maybe he's talking about trannies. Maybe he's talking about something else, right? The skirts in the office is a referent meta-mean, right? So I say it's a meta-mean, meaning the phrase, it's going to be raining tomorrow. Like, once again, if it is a meta-mean, meaning that someone doesn't want someone to leave, right? It's a coded word over it. Then the idea of whether or not one is agnostic to the proposition one doesn't know if it's going to rain tomorrow or not is not even approached, right? It's not a matter of truth or falsity, and it's not a matter of agnosticism. It's outside of the relegation. And if one says, no, it must be that way, then they already are approaching it from a necessary belief that that's how the community, one's relationship to their own phenomenology, right, in that first diagram that I had, they're preferencing at this point the intersection of phenomenology relative to the community of philosophical speakers that would argue this as the case.
Because it's neither true or false, and it's an unknown.
Tomorrow the Earth will be flat. Is that true or false?
Yeah,
that's.
I mean,
if you are justified to believe that, then I would say that I would call that knowledge. I wouldn't call it true, but I would call it knowledge.
It's not knowledge. I think you're confusing explicit knowledge with epistemological knowledge. Knowledge must be the proposition has to be true. He has to be true. Period.
Do people know that that Jesus is coming back?
I don't think they have knowledge of that, but I'm agnostic, and I hold that nobody really has knowledge.
Okay. Right. You don't think that they do, but they know they do.
Well, they could be wrong though. They think that they do.
Right.
They don't. Sure.
But I mean, then again, to be fair, you are an agnostic talking about positive claims.
They're all positive claims. Every claim is a positive claim in some way. Russell points out that every negative claim is still a positive claim.
Yeah. Sure. Well, anyway, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, this is.
Okay, so now he's caveated himself that every negative claim is a positive claim. So I'm going to make the claim that truth is also knowing all false propositions, right? Okay, so
This is the way I'm going to be looking at it, and then we're going to let's kind of look at the diagram here, if you don't mind, real quick. You want to go like one by one? Because I think we disagreed on Gnostic theist, actually, of all things. I think we agreed on the rest of them, which is odd. It kind of gives me crap about agnostic atheist, but you and I disagreed on Gnostic theist, which I thought was interesting. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have the hangout. Like, wow, that's cool. That's different.
No, and probably a year ago, I definitely would have disagreed with you, but now, I mean, it's very clear that agnosticism is a subset of non-belief and atheism is a subset of non-belief, but they don't entail one or the other.
Absolutely, yeah. And by the way, I just had a blog on that today.
Agnosticism is a subset of non-belief, and atheism is a subset of non-belief, right? And so now they're going to conflate the two as the case, meaning the guy Jim whatever is now attempting to migrate his colloquial vision and preference for the orthodoxy of this multi-axle read of agnosticism into a type of agreement with where Steve's coming from, right? Which is generally how discourse, meaning to come to agreement, is important for communities to come to agreement. But normally this is for some sort of larger approach of things.
I put in the video description if you want to read my latest entry. And I do it at 3 o'clock in the morning, so if it's got errors, please let me know. But
3 a.m.
philosophy. I really do write them at 3 a.m. But it's called Philosophy, Epistemology, Atheism, and Dissemination of False Beliefs. We do a multi-part series. This first one is on the atheist false belief that atheism and theism is a dichotomy. That has to die. Because I'm getting people on my videos coming on the comment section, and they're just insisting that theism and atheism are a dichotomy. And then you ask them the difference between a contradictory, and a dichotomy, and they have no idea. And I'm like, look, then you're making an assertion on things you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Okay, so once again, right, it's Steve wanting to say, look, whatever you're saying, you don't know what you're talking about, right? So the idea of saying the proposition there is no God, right? You could put in a negation that the proposition there is no God is false, right? Which might imply a theism, but one says there is a God, and then one says there is not a God, right? That's in contradiction, right? But a dichotomy, for someone to say there is no God and someone to say there is a God, right? That's the dichotomy that Steve doesn't want. Meaning he's upset for what I want to say are high-minded attempts to become more esoteric in this small division of philosophy, right? Such that he can say, "You don't know what you're talking about," right? And it just makes him look like a pious fuck in my mind, right? That's the problem I have with Steve, is that he's trying to come across and present himself as like the high grand poobah of fucking knowledge, right? Or the fucking way the things are in the world. I can agree with him because this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And it's fucking bullshit. But so Steve waddles, he'll show where he'll waddle through things. Okay, a dichotomy and a contradiction are not necessarily the same thing, but is it problematic that I maintain a dichotomy based on it not being a contradiction, but I want to present these two things as relational to one another, theism and non-theism, not theism and not theism?
Theism and atheism are not dichotomies. They're not a dichotomy of each other. It's as simple as that. They're called contradictories. But anyways, we'll get into that another time. So if you can read this with the line through, I can find one without the line, but I think we know what it says. So let's look at the agnostic atheist. Does not believe any gods exist. Doesn't claim to know that no God exists. There's a few problems with that right off the bat. First of all, how is this any different than agnostic?
Yeah, it's exactly agnosticism. This quadrant to me, I mean, this is built on the assumption that atheism is equivalent to non-belief.
Yeah, and so by doing that, one, this is really no different than agnostic, and it's worse. It's nonsensical, because if you have atheist as the negative, as a not believing something, you cannot have an epistemic modification. This would be a dosastic position normally to say.
Well, you can say that you're an agnostic non-believer.
Okay, now notice also, Steve will use the term doxaxic position, right? And that's doxaxic means one's relationship relative to belief. Like a doxaxic position is logic-based, logic that attempts to describe belief, right? But now Steve will throw that in as some sort of like accompanying supplement, categorically, to try to remain in this sophistication. And it's exactly here where he needs more scrutiny.
Well, that's redundant, though. All agnostics are wrong.
Yeah, of course it's redundant, but I wouldn't say that it's wrong necessarily. But I would say that it's another.
Wrong. It's superfluous. Yeah, there's a difference between wrong and superfluous, right? I mean, this is why I think the agnostic atheist is nonsensical, which is more than superfluous, in the weak case. If I was to make this a positive case, if I were to say atheism is the belief that gods don't exist, then this would make a little more sense. It wouldn't be nonsensical, it would just be superfluous, because at that point you're saying, I believe gods don't exist, but I'm not claiming it as knowledge. Okay, well, that's no different than an atheist. That's what an atheist would be. I believe there are no gods, but I'm not claiming it as knowledge. So agnostic atheist in the hard case is completely superfluous. What the hell's the difference? So in the hard case, it's superfluous. In the weak, it's either nonsensical or agnostic, depends on how you want to look at it. It's redundant.
Looking at it philosophically, like the quadrant itself is fallacious, but to say agnostic atheist is, it's like saying a duck chicken. You're like,
well, it's funny you mentioning that, because Theris has a very good video coming out this Wednesday that I've already watched, and he's going to be talking about this very thing. And he even points out that, in philosophy, this is just complete crap. But in colloquial terms, people use it, and I'm not arguing against that. But they need to understand what these things really are telling somebody, because they have so many stipulated definitions. I've had people tell me agnostic atheist means the weirdest things, and I'm like, well, how am I supposed to know what you mean by that? It's like that's not anything I've even devised because they're mixing an epistemological principle with a position on theism. If I say agnostic is an epistemological proposition, which is gods are unknowable, then I'm conflating that with the proposition of God existing. You're conflating literally epistemology with ontology, and I've explained that numerous times.
Well, now, right. Confusing epistemology with ontology, that's precisely what my point was. Not a confusion, but where they're conflated, right? So once again, Steve is going to push those away, where I'm saying, look at the once again, look at how this domain of ontology in language, as far as a colloquial description or a non-Cartesian or a non-justified true belief preference of epistemology, look at how this ontology can now overinflate. And that's what Steve's talking about, but he's criticizing it instead of accepting it as an indexing of the way people discuss things, which is more of where I'm coming from. Like, let's index this and let's quit pissing on this whole group of describing things. He's using this diagram, which he accepts, in order to ridicule this portion of the diagram and then confuse it, such as then to say, because he says, oh, a Gnostic theist, right, can't know God. They're always only within the domain of belief, but then you get experiencers or people like me that claim, you know, my claim, my history is that there has been a fissure in reality. There has been a breach in the normative claims of what nature is and the foundations of what one calls the real world, such that I would say I know there's something other, and in as much as there's something other that seems as if it has a dominance over me, I call that a god, or at least a demi-god, and then because of multiple instances of this breach in reality, I claim that I have a knowledge, an inductive knowledge, that there's something above, such as to apply God or gods, plural, right? So even though Steve would never hold that, right? And the regular atheist community always assumes that nobody has any confirmation that, and then they talk about something more like their relationship to Bigfoot, and then they make analogies, right? That's why the cadre that Steve runs in doesn't want to bring in somebody like me. And even as much as I attempt to get on the Atheist Experience, I seem to have a hell of a time getting on that radio show. I thought I'll drive down and make my claims, because I think I'm arguing I have a justification for, in this quadrant, of saying I'm a Gnostic theist.
To people, Matt Dillahunty, you know, even has a video to Anthony Magnabosco saying something similar: knowledge is a subset of belief. Therefore, he no longer holds that agnostic atheism is valid. He thinks it's a nonsensical position in the weak case. And I've talked to him on that directly. I've actually had
I'll
face-to-face,
be back
well,
in a minute. You
over
guys
the
keep listening.
on the internet, face-to-face communication with him on that particular topic. And I wanted to make sure that's actually his position, and it is. He changed it from, you know, about 5 or 6 years ago. But,
Right.
all right, so let's move to the next one. A Gnostic atheist. Now, this one's not nonsensical, except in the weak case. Well, it's again, how do you, if he says does not believe God exists, then how do you have knowledge if knowledge is a subset of belief? It makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, right. Well, and to me, it's the same thing as a Gnostic theist. I mean, a Gnostic theist is just as ridiculous.
But this one I think is worse. This one literally says, I claim to know God exists, but I don't hold it as a belief. What? What I'm saying, when people post this thing, they don't have a freaking clue how dumb it sounds.
Wait, hold on. No.
But what they don't understand is that the first proposition does not believe any God exists can definitely be reworded to say as a positive claim, you know, does believe no God exists.
Well, that's a different thing, though. That's in the strong case. That's fine.
No,
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Strong case is not nonsensical. If I say I believe gods do not exist and I know it, that's not nonsensical. That's not even superfluous. That's actually okay.
So
That's what this is, though. Sorry, Lawrence, go ahead.
No, so the thing is, I wouldn't say that not believing gods exist and believing no gods exist. They're mutually exclusive.
Well, no, because if you believe, okay, look at, if I believe there are no gods, that entails I do not believe gods exist. Okay, but this is saying that I only do not believe gods exist. It mentions nothing about believing gods don't exist. That's the problem. If this was to say does believe gods do not exist and claims to know it, there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. Because now you're actually modifying something. Because the atheist is saying, I believe gods don't exist. But I'm now going to modify that with an epistemic modification, saying, oh, not only is it that I just don't, not only is it just I have a belief that the gods don't exist, I'm claiming it as knowledge. That's okay with that. But that's not how this quadrant is written. So as it's written, it's crap. Which Would you agree? Because you can't say I don't believe gods exist and then say to go on to say knowledge. I mean, yes, that might be true if and only if you actually hold a belief that gods don't exist. But this doesn't entail that. It doesn't say that's the case. It could be.
Well, and I mean, it all hinges on conflation, though. It all hinges on word usage. I mean, what I think that they fail to do here, I mean, is to properly express the way that they're using these words.
Oh yeah, well this is vague. This is vague stuff. This is why I can't stand this diagram. It's crap.
So that guy JimMajors is making a greater commentary than just this diagram. Steve once again is going to say, "Yeah, I agree with you. This is crap," but then he's going to slide in this other diagram. I just know it because he already prefaced how he's going to go about this.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's very vague, but I mean, what do you think would be the best method, the best mean concept?
I like the linear way, like I showed you earlier. Yeah, you can do it that way. Yeah, it's not great, but it's better.
Well, I don't like.
Hey Steve, motherfucker, right? You don't. I say I've never watched this video and I haven't, but I already know you're going to supplement it because I know how you operate. So I have a knowledge of how you operate, and so I make these predictions, right? But now you have to trust something about me in order to pin whether or not I knew or didn't know, or whether or not I just had a belief, or you had a belief that you were going to supplement it this way, right? And let's just say this JimMajors guy, to me, he's after my own heart. He's got more of my sympathies in terms of how this can be diced and spliced. And he as much as he's trying to migrate and entertain your position, I think you're still talking past him. And then it's once again, it's the SteveMcRae channel, Steve will try to co-opt kind of a dominant notion of who has the reins on what truth and the way we should discuss philosophy really is. It's me, I'm Steve McRae, Master Grand Poobah of buttfuckery and philosophy.
I don't like mixing agnostic and atheist together as it is.
But what the linear one seems to do is put agnosticism on a zero, like it's a default.
Not necessarily a default, but it is in the middle. It's definitely more in the middle.
Well, it's in the middle, but it's left leaning.
No, I don't think so. I mean, an agnostic is just as much near a theist as an atheist.
Well, I mean, sinner is what is between believer and non-believer, right?
No, believer and no. That's the misconception.
He hasn't posted the diagram. He needs to get the other diagram back on while they're talking about this. Maybe he'll do it because he's still got this one.
It's centered between believer of it's true and believer that it's false.
Right.
Okay, there's a big difference there. A theist will say that God.
True or you don't believe it's true.
No.
Yes. And within you don't believe it's true, you have the hang on. And within the don't believe that it's true, you have the know that it's not true, and then the don't know if it's true.
Okay, let me explain it to you. There's an actual dichotomy between I believe and I don't believe. Okay.
Right.
Okay, but that's not where atheism is not in the middle there.
I believe.
No, it's not. It's a non-believer.
No. It is a non-believer. Yeah, it's on the non-believer side, right? But what it's in the middle of is I believe that it's true and I believe that it's false. It's between those two separate contradictory beliefs. If I believe gods exist or I believe gods don't exist, that's where atheism is in the middle. Agnosticism is in the middle. Here, let me show you the diagram here.
There we go.
Yeah.
Right here. So theist, right, will say I believe P, right? Believes P. The atheist says I believe not P. They take the disbelief position. Which I have a blog post on that I just came out with. I'm doing another one on it.
Okay.
Disbelief or not to accept the negation. Contrary to what you hear on atheist experience, they're wrong. It's straight up wrong. I mean, I could give you documentation yinging on that. But you have three epistemic states. You have belief, disbelief, and suspension of judgment. So disbelief means to believe the negation. So the atheist is going to say
belief, non-belief, and a suspension of judgment. Now, I already brought up the metamine example, right, which falls as a fourth criterion, which this does not delineate, that type of propositional analysis. A doxastic relationship to the proposition is nonsensical. So it would fall closer to a decoherentism, even though it is coherent amongst those who are using it. That's the fourth option. Once again, Steve's limited in his approach to philosophy. So he tries to narrow it this way, and he pigeonholes people. It's really upsetting.
Say, I believe that there are God. So this is where agnostic lies. Well, he doesn't say, I don't believe that's true, and I don't believe it's false. That's why it's this not BP and not B, not P. That's where it's in the middle.
Not P, not the belief relative to the proposition, and not the belief relative to the not proposition is the agnostic position. The way I like to divvy things up in my text, right? You have the thesis, then you have the antithesis, and you have the synthesis, which is the Hegelian dialectic, as it's been pinned to Hegel, right? But an imbrication, right? I've been looking up the word imbricate here for my text, right? Is a tiling. It's a relational aspect of a tiling such that there's a domain of a shared tangent, right, that is relational between a thesis and an antithesis, and where the synthesis's domain is of reconciliation. I use reconciliation in that now we're not looking at the domain shared like a box, but merely the tangent, or both, right? Because you can try to talk about that axis that runs that way. This starts to modulate or visualize propositional logic in a different format than these particular types of visualization that are preferenced by Alex Malpass. I even in my text have an area based on Alex an interjection or a response, right? So basically it was a dialogue, and I just basically post a relationship to a dialogue in terms of what an analeatheism, neither true nor false, right, or a dileatheism, both true or false, is, so that you have a and not a, and here you have not a and not a, right, in terms of contradictions. But let's see.
So are you saying that agnosticism is the line?
No, agnosticism is this area. It doesn't have to be.
Okay, so where would you draw the line between belief and non-belief?
Well, that's going to be somewhere. This is a gray area between belief. I mean, well, belief and non-belief. This right here is non-belief. All this is non-belief.
Right. Yeah, so exactly. That's what I'm saying.
This border right here is I believe and I believe. On both sides are beliefs. These are both agnostics. It's just in the middle between two different beliefs.
Well, one's a belief and one is the rejection of the belief.
But that's still a belief.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to clarify for everybody.
Yeah, believes. See, I got the B. This is not belief. So.
Once again, now, okay, now here's the problem, right? The guy kind of got him on a gotcha, right? Like, so justified true belief. Well, you know what a Gnostic is. That's a belief. So Steve's both correct and incorrect, showing that there's a type of dileatheist approach, right? Both he now has to know and believe what an agnostic is, and believe that this is a suspension of belief, while also believing that he knows what an agnostic is, which is that guy's point.
So all this is not right. This is what we call a weak atheist right here, not BP. I just don't believe. That's this. The agnostic says, well, not only that, but I don't believe that's false either.
The point that I was trying to make, though, is that the line on the right side of agnostic and the left side of theist, that dividing line right there, can be considered a dividing line, where on the left is the rejection of the claim, and on the right is the belief of the claim.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't use the rejection, but not acceptance. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Okay, so we do agree that the top part of this is crap so far, right?
Okay, so now Steve's giving a caveat. He says he agrees. We're gonna move forward, right? But then here's Steve's big thing is at the end, make certain he tries to take over. I should almost skip ahead. I kind of wanted to limit this video to 1 hour and 45 minutes at most, but maybe we'll go to 2 hours.
Lawrence,
yes,
you on board with that?
Yeah, makes sense.
Awesome. All right, so down here we have agnostic theist. Believes that God exists, but doesn't know that his belief to be knowledge. Okay, so how is that any different than just saying you're a theist? Theist is not making it up. It's the same freaking thing, people. So this is redundant. Say you're Gnostic.
Okay, so once again, Steve says that to make the claim that one knows that they're a theist is redundant and a doxaxic claim. The doxaxic claim is about belief. Belief, once again, the agnostic theist is the traditional, regular theist that says, oh, I read the text, and through exegesis or eisegesis or through revelation, I came to understand that there may be the ability to have doubt injected into my theism, right? But it's with regards the dichotomy between an agnostic theist who has that and then somebody that uses reason and empirical witnessing, such as I claim that I've had relative to seeing some things that I would say are supernatural or unexplainable or unable to isomorphically project as part of human technology, right? Such that it appears as if it's alien technology. And if something is alien and it intersects and upsets this reality, then it runs para, so it's the paranormal, so it runs alongside the normal, right? And so my point is that whatever Steve's claim is here, if he says this is a nonsense split, I'd say, well, bullshit, because you have a difference between those that read text and develop their belief system on, once again, propositions and relationships to truth orientation of propositions and acceptance of Bible and Bible contradictions within this realm. And then you get people that have witnessing, or they're called experiencers, that may claim something like this that is close enough to something that's biblical or Abrahamic or Hindi or some sort of other relationship to a theos, where they would say, oh yeah, I'm knowledgeable in this orthodox multi-axal description towards my theism, meaning I'll say I know it, right? But what it is you can pin them down to, they themselves, like me, would even have things that you would reserve as caveats. Someone says, am I a Christian? I say, hey Mike, are you a Christian? I say, I'm not a Christian, right? Meaning I approximate both the texts and I have my evidences of, so I'll grant that. Hey Mike, are you not a Muslim? Oh, I'm not a Muslim, meaning I'm not anything that I'm in some domain, shared domain or intersection, right, of. I'm also a part of that. So it is interesting to see where people end their discussions. Steve preferences this way.
But at the same time, I think this is whenever they're using agnostic and gnostic, I think they're trying to use degrees of certainty.
If that was the case, then it would be a different. I think it'd be a different diagram.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean the landscape is more of that.
It would be more linear, less quadrant.
The single axial versus multi-axial. But so,
Right.
so far we have this is nonsensical. This is nonsensical. This is redundant or superfluous. So this leaves the last one. This is where we disagree. You think Gnostic theist?
Actually,
What?
So sorry, I couldn't stay for the last and most controversial part.
You gotta go. You have to go.
Yeah, I gotta get to class.
Okay.
Okay, man. Have a good one.
All right, have a good one, guys.
By the way, link to join is in the video description if you want to come in. All right,
Yeah,
so,
you guys want.
yeah, come on in. So let's look at Gnostic theist then. Believes a God exists, claims to know God exists. Now, you think this is nonsensical. I just think it's. I actually don't even have a problem with this one.
I don't have a problem with it because it uses the word claims to know.
Yeah. Well, what was your issue before? Because let me tell you why. This is the only one that I really don't have a major issue with. Because you can say, I believe God does not. I believe God exists. It makes you a theist. Now, if you want to modify that epistemic modifier, to make it more than just nostastic, okay, great. You can do that. Now I'm saying, not only do I believe that God exists, but I'm also making it a knowledge claim. You're making it up here. And by the way, this can read KP entails EP. Because if you have KP, you also have EP. So.
Now, remember at the beginning of the video, or earlier on in the video, Steve basically, he eschewed this, meaning he disregarded it. Now, meaning he said that's all, but on his unilateral one that he was just circling, right, he said, now that one's the toughest one to buy into, right? Steve's an ex-Mormon, right, so he's well conditioned into that theology, and then he migrated to kind of a tentative atheist position.
Yeah, so I don't even have a problem. The only one that makes sense to me.
Would you call BP the agnostic atheist and KP the Gnostic theist?
KP would be the Gnostic theist, yeah. And then the agnostic theist. But that's, again, just theist.
So what is that? Okay, so what is wrong with the okay, so if you go back to the other side, you've got so you've got a KP and a BP, which are just positive claims for the same proposition, but just different. Okay.
Proposition here is non-existent, basically.
Right. Okay. So that quadrant would work if you would leave out the agnostics. If it was just atheist versus theist, that would work. If you didn't use the term agnostic, if you use a different terminology.
Well, I've kind of been telling people that they really shouldn't be using the terms agnostic and agnostic together. I mean, people don't realize these are separate terms. These are not related. Gnostic and agnostic are unrelated to each other, even though they're similar.
Okay, now here's the whole point. This is a big shtick, right? And is that now basically Steve now wants to bifurcate the orthodoxy of the term agnostic from Gnostic, and suggest that the A prefix in agnostic is not a form of negation, right? That it's a whole different category now. So you'll hear some sort of dialogue on this.
They're not related. Gnostic was a form of second century Gnosticism, which Thomas Huxley kind of coined the phrase agnosticism because he was comparing them to modern Gnostics of his time. He thought they didn't have justification or any kind of claim to knowledge of gods or even belief. And so he coined the term Gnosticism. These are
okay, so any claim or knowledge of belief is claimed Gnosticism. So he's rooting it into a 6th century description made by Huxley, who's not 6th century, I don't believe, describing this little pocketed genre from which the etymology of the term Gnosticism came into place. So I better put this back on regular speed so you guys can hear a little bit more of what he's saying for my critique here.
unrelated terms. Even Wiki says don't confuse them. And yet, look what they do on these things. They just blend them all together and say, oh, look, we have Gnostic for knowledge and Gnostic for atheist. But no, agnostic, this Gnos, was not meant to have knowledge in that. That's not what it was for. Huxley coined the term not for knowledge, but the illusion of knowledge. Right? They thought these people were making claims they shouldn't be making because they weren't justified to do it. So agnostic doesn't really have crap to do with knowledge in that regard. It only does in the epistemological sense for a proposition, which could be gods are unknowable or not. But that's a different proposition altogether.
I'm trying to get one of my best friends in here.
See, so once again, he's gonna use. I almost want to say an anecdotal reference to say, oh no, Gnosticism should never have the word knowledge in it, right? But now Steve's bringing modern propositional logic and the history of the advent of justified true belief into modern dialogue, comparing it to the back in order to cut off the suffix of agnosticism and totally try to deregulate the orthodoxy or the colloquial use of agnostic, right? Which is his shtick with the cadre of Ozzy Mandaris and Alex Malpass, and maybe Jack Ainstrict is in on this to some extent in terms of what will feed Steve, right? But it's just funny to watch Steve. He's like a neurotic, bounce around mentally over this, really wanting to make certain that this bifurcation, this vivisection between the A preface of Gnostic is form-fitted relative to the pocketed history.
We were actually talking about this last night, and it was just, I mean, he was like me, he was introduced to new atheism to Dawkins and everything, into the quadrants and the sliding scale, and I think it might have been a bit much for him, but I mean, he seemed to be really receptive of it. But I think that had he not been my friend, and had he not, I don't think people are very receptive of these things. I made a post on Twitter yesterday. I think just talking about just the dangers of tribalism and group thinking, and just how people will.
Okay, so Steve and his discussions with this guy has wore this guy down a little bit, right? Is in terms of him now wanting to preference this unilateral non-orthodoxy of this discussion, right? And Steve, even on Facebook, has made some posts. I'm not going to pull them up because I'm not going to go through his whole feed to figure out which one it was that we got in an argument with, right? But basically, he has a whole bunch of people responding. When I respond, then he says, "Oh, you're just being semantic or rhetorical or long-winded, and you're not describing anything." Well, hence, once again, my book. I'll pull it up. You guys can download it where it is now. Realize there's going to be another final edit. That part I was going over earlier. That was on the fly, but you can see that this guy now wants people to reapproach the discussion. I have nothing. I have no animosity relative to Steve or his cadre trying to get people to reapproach the discussion and take in new considerations, right? But these new considerations are merely new indexings, right? As far as I'm concerned, the multi-actual orthodoxy accepted in colloquial descriptions that has meaning within a community of people, even if these guys are successful at dislodging that orthodoxy remains chronologically on a timeline of philosophical thinkers whom have used that, plus whole communities whom have used that multi-axis description, such that they're not going to be able to eradicate it from the history of the chronology of communal use, right? It's like an overshadowing of how a whole region of people existed. It's like saying someone's dialect, like, oh yeah, they're 1950s Georgia and they talk like this and blah blah blah, compared to a modern day contemporary notion of more of a shared dialogic expressions becomes more like region to region has fewer discrepancies. People in the South speak like the North, and the North like the East, and the East like the West, so forth. So there's more of a homogeny that's occurring due to the internet, due to television, due to people's changing, right? And so the whole point, though, is that there's still, like Bill Burr has a Boston accent. His accent varies from other people slightly that are from Boston also. But for the most part, it's still regional. Now, that may disappear in the future, right? It most certainly will probably morph to some extent because of the ubiquity of shared information and dialogue. People will condition their kids, or their kids might not bond to their regional dialogue. It doesn't mean there's not a pocket of chronology that exists that we can index that says that was used this way. And Steve's guilty of that, and then trying to re-up on his notion once again of what the case should necessarily be in philosophy. I'm running on an hour and 50 minutes. Let's push this a couple more minutes. We'll try to close down within 2 hours.
Appoint themselves a leader and look to an idol, and then devoid that person of any wrongdoing or being able to say anything wrong, and it's just and then they just I think it's quite hypocritical to me. It's not any different than somebody holding up a Bible and saying this is true, this is all I need.
I see it daily. I mean, in fact, recently, one of my other blogs where I made a very good argument about what disbelief actually is utilized in literature. And you know what the biggest rebuttal people had, and I'm not even kidding, this was probably a dozen people on, especially philosophical insiders on Facebook. The biggest complaint they had was, oh, well, Matt Dillahunty wasn't really wrong from his perspective, so he can tell a caller he's wrong that he can't use the term properly because Matt has his own versions of definitions. I'm like, so if a caller calls into a creationist show and says evolution is a change of related frequency, or in a given population of species from one generation to the next generation over time, and the caller host says, no, that's wrong, evolution is just change. Oh, no, theory is not a well-substantiated explanation or predictive model. No, it just means guess. We wouldn't let a creationist get away with that. So why is it that I'm getting flack by people saying, well, Matt Dillahunty was right? No, he wasn't. Guaranteed he was not correct. He told a caller he was wrong when the caller said disbelief means the rejection of a claim in when it comes to propositional logic. That's what it's understood to be. I've cited
true.
numerous, Russell.
And if you think about it for 5 freaking seconds, just 5 seconds is all you get to think about it. If somebody came running into my house, into my front door, and said, "There's a pink unicorn in the road," I'd say, "Get the fuck out of my house!" You know, like I don't believe you. You know, like what are you talking about?
Believing. When you disbelieve, you're saying that person is false. You're literally saying the opposite. You're taking the opposite position here. Disbelief. Positive.
No,
Yeah, it is. Positive unbelief. Mental
no,
rejection.
okay, let's go to.
Okay, positive unbelief. But by the way, this, if you go to MikeFail.com, right? MikeFail will default you to my Weebly, which is where I host my site. You just scroll down, you'll see embedded contradiction. Right here's the link. You can download this same text here. It's about 158 pages for your edification. If you want to know why it is I consider what it is Steve doing in discourse to be dishonorable, right? And I didn't write it for Steve by any means. Like, this is my contention on defoundational philosophy and dialetheism, paraconsistent logics, right? Steve once again is good at caveating and migrating the discourse to allow certain exceptions, but then to really try to tap down. And I mean, maybe I'm ironically guilty of it, but my contentions, my beliefs on things include a necessary hypocrisy, right? When you're in contradiction, there must necessarily be an antimonious sort of contradiction. Like, embedded contradiction is the notion that the individual is going to run on a sliding scale of hypocrisy. And I did get that phrase from Corey Anton, Professor Anton on YouTube, or Corey Anton, CoreyAnton. He's a communications guy in general semantics and semiotics communication. Very good to listen to. I've had my fun with him in the past, but he brought up, whether he plagiarized it from another author or not, the notion of a sliding scale of hypocrisy, which allowed as kind of a birthing nugget in which to discuss anatheism and dialetheism in terms of how a contradiction can both be true and or a false, a false contradiction, and how it is we can divvy up and embed not a and not a, or a and not a, right? Cases, set cases, which would include within it a type of
Let's go to the gumballs. If I say there are even found gumballs in there, and you say that I'm wrong, are you in disbelief?
Yeah, if I say you're wrong, that means I'm saying the opposite. You're confusing disbelief and unbelief. Unbelief may be a simple failure to believe from lack of evidence or knowledge. If you say, "Hey, Steve, the gumballs are even," and I say I don't believe you, that's unbelief. But Matt Dillahunty is confusing unbelief with disbelief. Disbelief is the assertion of the negation. Big difference.
Can you have disbelief in their knowledge?
Here, wait, right here. Disbelief. If you conclude a position to be false, then the appropriate attitude toward that proposition is disbelief. That's where do I have that? Right here. So this is from Rutgers University. Disbelief. If you conclude that a proposition is false, then the appropriate attitude toward that proposition is disbelief. That means that you think the proposition is false. Atheism is disbelief. It's not unbelief. Big difference.
If the proposition is, I know that God is real, then you can say, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you know that.
That's unbelief. That's not disbelief.
Okay, but you can be an
So okay, here's the discourse, right? Like, this guy is now talking about Steve's claim, or kind of like in a description, like already there's a conflict in communication, right? Meaning, and once again, this guy's after my own heart, and how he's trying to make more obtuse this drive for acuteness that Steve has, right? So this guy's kind of opening it up, right? And so this confusion between a disbelief and an unbelief, Steve wants to impregnate that distinction, where this guy wants to maintain that the conflation is is not only needed but regular, right? And then so now Steve's pointing to the distinction, and this guy's talking about Steve's orientation to the distinction. I suspect Steve is not going to be aware that that's what this guy's pointing to, and I'm pretty certain this guy is not aware that's also what he's pointing to. Meaning to have a description of another person's belief is different than a description of what one is referencing about their belief.
Agnostic until that you don't believe them.
Of course.
Just because.
Of course, absolutely. I do that all the time. I don't believe a lot of people. I'm allowed to do that as an example. Sure.
But what I'm saying is, it's the same thing with the gumballs. Somebody can walk up to it and say, I know there's an odd amount of gumballs in there, and you can say, I don't believe you. Like, I don't believe that you have knowledge.
Right,
There's an odd amount of gumballs.
I agree with you, but that wasn't what Matt said to the caller. The caller said disbelief means that the proposition's false. And he's like, no, that's not what disbelief means. And it's like, wait a minute, if you want to have your proprietary stipulative definitions for American atheists, go ahead, or atheist experience, you're allowed to, okay? But you cannot tell somebody who had the proper use of it, which respect to a proposition, that they're wrong. Because they weren't wrong. Yeah. They weren't wrong at all. That's exactly what, when you see this.
See, okay, so now Steve's guilty of saying they're not wrong, implying that they were right, to reapproach this, whatever this discussion is with Matt Dillahunty on the atheist experience. But once again, it's basically Steve now backing that discussion is that way, and that he himself is not, that Steve himself is not trying to prioritize the definitions of the way things need to be on his show, this show, SteveMcRae channel, right? He's guilty of the same thing. But now, so this is a, they're critiquing some particular discussion that I'm not privy to, right? And I'm critiquing their discussion, right? So when you have dialogues about dialogues, it makes for interesting things. And where are we at? Okay, we have about 4 minutes to 2 hours. I swear I'll close down. I'll give my end statement.
Disbelief, when you're reading something, that's what it entails. Oh wait, I'm not screen sharing, am I?
I'm gonna, maybe I should just pause there, right? Because that's a good one. What it entails. So Steve will be notorious in assuming once again that he somehow, based on his preference to appropriate himself to a certain philosophical definitional approach, what should be divvied out and what shouldn't be divvied out, such that he then becomes master critic of the other people's use, meaning such that his dialogue, his discourse here, and the hand-in-handness that he has with Ozzy Mandaris and what he utilizes from Alex Malpass or any other guest, what he's agreeing to, right? He tends to reify that and then try to import it and pull from the philosophical encyclopedias as if those definitional roots are necessarily prime and they're necessarily key. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just trying to say, note that he's pointing to that, preferencing that, and that he himself now uses the term entangled. What is entangled or entailed, right? You could say there's entanglements and there's entailments, right? And so he's going to try now to home in on what the limits of appropriate entailment are, right? And this is the whole problem, right? Is that you have different domains of philosophical approaches. I was trying to use it, or trying to point out, that sometimes the phenomenological domain will increase, sometimes the ontic domain, the communal domain, and these can overshadow or push back on the epistemic domain. Steve is trying to take the epistemic domain and then dice and splice something within it for a greater reapproach, but he once again has to shore up agreement based on referencing or an exegesis and an eisegesis of philosophical definitions, right? And then shore up communal agreement with Alex Malpass to make certain his logic is correct and preferenced the way Alex, within a logic community, promotes his logic. Steve, if you bring up Russell, right, if you read the Principles of Mathematics, the very beginning of the book and the very end of the book and the chapter X on contradiction shows that Russell himself agrees that there's unresolvable contradictions in how one approaches math, right? Like this goes like even, and I don't know to what extent Steve would reference Russell if we were talking about Russell, but it's kind of I think the issue that I have, right, it's just an anti-sympathy, or it's an unsympathy, or I'm not sympathetic to Steve McRae and his approach towards um, how he's trying to pigeonhole and corner and monopolize the market of philosophy as if he's got some sort of monopoly or proprietary value on truth. And it's just interesting to watch someone kind of try to move up, do like a self-serving high gram poobah, throw smoke up their own ass thing. And I mean, he's got a good show, the Non Sequitur show, that's scaling up. I'm not saying anything about that. I'm just trying to say, like, look at all the different ways that people have these discussions, this guy and that guy. Everybody has a different kind of opinion. The whole idea of trying to garner agreement is one thing, and it's a good thing, but at the same time, it's also it's very, very problematic. I believe in more of an ontological true indexing, such that this video now is like their video is an indexing of their dialogue, and mine's an indexing of my critique of this critique, and that the Derridian notion or the philosophical notion that there's always a next word in a discussion seems as if it is openly it seems like it's descriptive to say, yeah, there's always a next word, but that each one of the videos is a type of its own indexing, right? And that we're just studying that it is a grander study of semantics, that the analogic is contextual based on those who start with a contextual premise, so the continental dominating over the analytic as opposed to the preference of the analytic dominating over the continental. That being said, I'll just wrap it up from there. Who knows where I'll go with any next thing. All right, let's shut this mother down. Yow! What do we got? Compliment Jim Majors, Steve McRae critique. Yeah, Jim Majors, Steve McRae, Mick.